Okay, welcome everyone to our session. I'm quickly just going to introduce the session, then I'm going to introduce our incredible speakers. We have one speaker online, and then we're going to get started. Today our session is going to be focusing on the increased worrying trend of increased criminalization of impartial aid, and it's also going to focus on the increase of harmful information that is being spread by big tech and social media platforms, and then the link between the two. So we're first going to speak more about the criminalization of impartial humanitarian aid, and then we're going to focus on the harmful information aspect, and then the link between the two. And our speakers are also going to say what their organizations are doing to try and work to prevent these harmful trends. To my right, I have Jean-Francois Cote, who is a medical doctor, hello, and he is also the president for Médecins du Monde. And then we have, to my right, we have Christina Viller, who has started her own organization. She's the director of Insecurity Insight. This is an organization that focuses on the protection of the humanitarian space from violence and monitors how harmful narratives are being spread about the aid sector on social media. And then right at the end, we have Dr. Fernanda Martin. She has a PhD in social science and is the director of advocacy and strategy for the Foundation of Multitudes. And then on the screen, we have Katrin Thompson. Katrin Thompson is a security policy officer for the Director General for the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations, also known as ECHO, for the European Commission. So welcome to our incredible speakers and welcome to the audience. We're going to immediately get started with a question for you, Jean-Francois. What are the concerning forms of criminalization and the trends that you're noticing of the criminalization of impartial aid, and what are the consequences that you're seeing for your organization and the populations that you're supporting?
Thank you very much for this question. Hello everybody, I'm very happy to be here, and I really want to thank all the people who managed this meeting, all the organization. It's really wonderful, and I'm very happy to be here, and I also want to have a special thank for Léa Gauthier, who helped me to prepare my speech. So thank you for the opportunity to address an issue that it's for us become the most serious threat to humanitarian actor, the criminalization of impartial aid. It's really a kind of existential issue for us, a question for independent humanitarian actor. We are no longer only exposed to insecurity because of the violence, and of the conflict, but we face legal, administrative, and political pressure that turn our core mission into a potential criminal offense, and of course contradicting engagement of state with international humanitarian law. And this is why Médecins du Monde is involved in the HOPES Consortium, alongside Action Against Hunger, Humanity Inclusion, the Norwegian Refugee Council, and Insecurity Inside. Together, we are documenting this trend and supporting the humanitarian community in developing evidence-based recommendations to counter them. But let me outline the form of criminalization that concerns us most. First of all, despite major progress such as the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2664 and 2761, which create a standing humanitarian exemption to human sanction, we continue to see domestic counterterrorism law, especially the ones that counter the financing of terrorism. And sanction regime apply in a way that restricts impartial humanitarian action. In fact, even with this exemption, many national frameworks still criminalize activity that are fully consistent with international humanitarian law, and also the medical code of ethics. And unfortunately, this exposes staff to detention, arrest, and harassment. In Yemen, for example, almost 100 of UN and civilian society staff have been detained, illustrating how humanitarian personnel can be used as leverage in political negotiation. In Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, counterterrorism law have been interpreted in a way that restrict engagement with non-state armed groups, even when such engagement is essential to reach civilians. Second, we face administrative and regulatory barriers, complex registration procedure, opaque authorization system, and sudden change in national legislation can expose our team to accusation of non-compliance. In many contexts, this measure is used not for regulation, but for control, intimidation, or leverage. The occupied Palestinian territory is a striking example, where several Palestinian civil society and humanitarian organizations have been deregistered or designed as terrorists by the authority. This action impacts our ability to deliver aid in Gaza, increasing the cost of our operation, create delay in delivery essential services like mental health support in the West Bank for people attacked by setters. This is a clear example of how administrative, military, or legal measures are used to control and target the entire humanitarian ecosystem for political reasons, in violation in international law, even in a genocide context. Other examples lie in Myanmar, where the number of humanitarian workers detained after the earthquake remain unclear. In Afghanistan, new NGO registration requirements and restriction on movement, mainly targeting women humanitarian workers, in addition to interference with the management in the program, have created significant operational barriers. Third, we are deeply concerned by harmful narrative, political statement, media campaign, and social media content that portray humanitarian organizations as based, irresponsible, or even complicity with armed groups, especially when they are labeled as terrorists. These narratives fuel suspicion and hostility and can lead to serious incidents. According to the Insecurity Insight, in the last 10 years, almost 1,500 humanitarian workers have been detained. This reflects a systemic shrinking of humanitarian space. The consequences for Médecins du Monde and the OPS partner are significant. Our team faces risk of detention, intimidation, and legal threat. And the greatest impact is on the population we serve, of course. Because when humanitarian organizations are criminalized, access shrink, medical missions are delayed, clinics are closed, supply are blocked. And in fact, criminalization does not protect civilians, it punishes them. And let us be clear, these measures contradict the obligation of state under international humanitarian law. Today, the criminalization of aid is not an accidental byproduct of conflict. It has become a structural failure of the shrinking humanitarian space. This is applied to all countries, including the Western democracy, where populist parties openly identify as anti-right.
Thank you so much. And what I really appreciated from your intervention is the real-life examples that you were giving. I think now to just bring you, Katrin, into the conversation, if you can just tell us, with this evolving, really troubling trends. Like, what is your organization doing to try and combat this?
Thanks a lot, and also from my end, thanks a lot for the invitation to sit in this panel. I think in general, with the devastating trend that we see in the number of attacks toward aid workers, which is triggered by threats such as disinformation and misinformation, among others, I think this whole development really shows how fragile the humanitarian system is, and I think it's never been more critical to enhance the knowledge of these challenges and also strengthen the protection and security of humanitarian operations. With that said, from our end, DG ECHO is an active donor, and we believe our contribution and support towards the humanitarian system, including for aid workers' safety and security, should not only come via our funding frameworks, but this need to go hand in hand with our work on advocacy and policy work, together with our network in the humanitarian sector. In terms of advocacy, DG ECHO is a keen advocate for the protection of humanitarian workers, and as facilitator of the annual UN resolution on the protection of humanitarian and UN personnel. The resolution contains strengthened and targeted language, addressing these concerns of disinformation, misinformation, and also hate speech, and also how this development is increasing security threats and access constraints on the ground. Next to this, the EU has also associated itself with the Australian Declaration on Protection of Humanitarian Personnel, which also highlights the need for addressing disinformation and misinformation challenges targeting humanitarian aid workers' safety and security. And then next to our work on advocacy policy, in relation more to our concrete steps in our funding frameworks, DG ECHO also have several initiatives, such as the Protect Aid Workers mechanism, which is a notable push to enhance the support for aid workers in the field, and in particular for local workers, which is a great concern to us. This mechanism is providing grants for humanitarian NGOs to cover the cost of both legal, financial, psychosocial support for aid workers that have suffered an incident while on duty. And there is a dedicated page for the Protect Aid Workers mechanism if you would like to learn more on this. And this can be support for any incident experienced by aid workers, which could be triggered by, for instance, disinformation and misinformation threats. Additionally, DG ECHO is funding the NGO-led initiative, the HOPES project that was just mentioned, which aims to dive into these trends and challenges of criminalization and disinformation. And as mentioned, it's both to enhance the knowledge and understanding of this development, but also look into potential tools and practices to enhance the protection of humanitarian personnel. And then maybe to summarize all of this, in general, under DG ECHO's global policy humanitarian implementation plan for 2026, it's the first time that we have dedicated funding available for security risk management proposals. And here we aim to provide funding to support cross-cutting threats targeting aid workers, which also includes a focus on criminalization, disinformation, and misinformation. And this HIP is currently open for proposals with a deadline for security being the 1st of June.
Great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for that intervention, and I think a lot of people in the audience will be happy to hear that there is more funding going towards this, because that's crucial for all of our work. If I can zoom in a little bit more on the disinformation and harmful information aspect and bring you, Christina, into the conversation. So, I mean, we're rapidly seeing more and more harmful narratives being brought about. Like, what do you actually see as the concrete risks towards this disinformation in impartial humanitarian action? Like if we were to make it a little bit more real to maybe some of the people who in the audience, this is not their area of expertise.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for putting this really important subject on the agenda today. So maybe this first question for everyone a little bit in the room, what do you think of when you think of disinformation? What comes to mind? Is it AI-generated fake images? Is it perhaps funny memes of Lego figures? This is something what we're seeing a lot at the moment. And this is something that also affects the aid sector, but it's relatively rare that there are such directly fake images being created. I can think of an example from Ethiopia, for example, where someone went through a lot of trouble to draw images where it said that the WFP was in fact the weapons funneling program to a rebel group. So these things happen, but it's rare. So when we talk about these harmful narratives, what we are really concerned about is the reframing of the values, the purpose, the underlying principles of aid via these social media platforms that reach thousands, millions of people. So how are these things reframed? What are we seeing, what we're worried about? One thing is already what Jean-François mentioned, it's the link to terrorism. It might seem absurd, but we're finding more and more the allegation by providing food and health to the wrong people that this is support for terrorism. Then there are these increasing narratives that aid undermines sovereignty. It is linked to colonial projects. It is a cover for espionage. Then there are accusations that is all a big exploitation, that crises are created to justify the high salaries for people for fake diseases that may not exist. So, and these narratives that are increasingly out there are then used to justify this criminalization that Jean-François talked about, the arrests, the license withdrawn of aid agencies that we've seen in increasing number of countries. And they are linked to the way aid workers come under direct attack and how people think it's somewhat deserved and they don't really need the protection. So let me say a few things of what seems to trigger these narratives. That might seem a little bit technical, but the reason why I think we really need to think about this is because it's only when we understand how it happens that we can think of the entry points to addressing it. So as I said, these fake big images, it happens, it's very rare. Very often, it is a press release or a program on Radio Okapi in the DRC or similar, so something that comes from the aid agency itself that is the trigger. How? Because under a neutral, completely descriptive information of what is happening, the comments come in. People go online and then they question the intent about something that's announced, and then they suggest it is all about espionage, it's about supporting terrorism, you name it. There are different things. And it then mixes with different conversations that are ongoing, and it becomes nearly impossible to know when this may be driven, what people have called the finger puppet theaters, of people who have multiple identities and have conversations essentially with themselves under some press releases, or when it becomes the general opinion of people who are exposed to this for seconds before they swipe off to the next news. But then there is also something that I think is really important for the aid sector to be aware of, because social media is revolutionizing how we communicate, all of us. And that means social media is also increasingly an opportunity for conflict-affected people and other people in need to share their views, their opinions, their thoughts, their criticism. And if we as an aid sector call everything that is negative about the aid sector disinformation, we are instantly minimizing their legitimate criticism, and that over time fuels an anti-aid sentiment that makes people think there may be something to it when others put these comments under there, the aid sector is just self-serving and for its own purposes. So this is many of the sort of key things we are facing at the moment. And I think the final sort of point to make there is that there is also a risk of how very well-intended communication is done. So for example, after an earthquake, there are images put out there of aid having arrived. But then this information does not get communicated further, and then you'll also find communities actually saying, well, we didn't receive anything. Where is this? And then the gaps are again filled by people who have their possibly agendas around underlying aid. So I sort of leave it at there, but to sort of, as the key thing, disinformation is real. Misinformation is a real risk, but there is also a huge challenge for the aid sector of how to adapt to this new world of communicating and how to get this right, that it doesn't become a vehicle for harmful information.
Thank you for that intervention. I think what you highlighted is I think sometimes we feel helpless and that we are just receiving disinformation and we can't do anything about it. And I think what I really liked is that you are highlighting our own responsibility in this and what we can do both to combat it, but also to ensure that we are actually also not making things worse and not looking at legitimate criticism. Now over to you, Fernanda. I wanted to bring you into this conversation, and I know that you work quite directly with locally affected groups, and so I wanted to just find out from you, what are the sort of dynamics that you're seeing within the fields, and how are you seeing harmful information actually playing out in local contexts amongst different actors?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First, I need to say that I am very happy to be here today after what I can only describe as a small logistical marathon, canceled flights, a visa that didn't arrive in time for a previous trip, and a level of suspense that honestly, I felt like a European series. So just being physically here feels like a small personal humanitarian success today. I would like to warmly thank Marianne, Dirk, and Axel for making this possible and for creating space for dialogue between communities that don't always have enough opportunity to exchange. For us at Fundação Multitudes, it is very important to deepen dialogue with the humanitarian field because dynamics around civic space and information environmentals are directly shaping the conditions in which humanitarian and rights-based action can take place. My reflections today draw on two main components of work from Fundação Multitudes. First one is our recent contribution to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights on the right to democracy and enabling conditions, including civic space and digital environments. And the second one is an ongoing research funded by UK FCDO on violence and risks faced by environmental human rights defenders in Chile. This investigation will be published in the coming days. So, across this process that I mentioned, this contribution, this research, I think we have one key insight stands out. As our colleagues mentioned, disinformation and harmful information are not just communication challenges. They are increasingly shaping who is perceived as legitimate, who is considered credible, and who is allowed to act in the public sphere. Across different countries in Latin America, we see recurring narratives where civil society actors are described as politically motivated, ideological, or even acting against national interests. These narratives are not new, but digital infrastructures have significantly amplified their speed, their reach, and their ability to generate offline consequences. In our research with women environmental defenders, violence rarely appears in isolated forms. Instead, it tends to manifest simultaneously across social, institutional, territorial, and digital dimensions. These layers reinforce each other over time. I separated 3 main risks for locally rooted actors that we are realizing the last years. The first one is the reputational delegitimization. Reputational attacks increasingly function as political tools. Organizations are framed as anti-development, foreign agents, actors with hidden agendas. This leads to erosion of public trust, difficulties in building legitimacy and acceptance at the community level. The second one, we often observe as a sequence. We start with stigmatizing narratives, and after that, it's followed by institutional consequences. This can include restrictive regulations, as Francois mentioned, administrative barriers, and increased scrutiny. As we highlight in our submission to the court, restrictions on civic space often operate through combined legal, institutional, and discursive mechanisms. In the case of environmental defenders, they reported for us online harassment, defamation, coordinated smear campaigns, and these affect directly public credibility, personal safety, psychological well-being, and in this research, more than 50% of the human rights defenders in Chile experienced psychological violence. A large majority expressed concern about physical safety for themselves and their families. We have here a structural asymmetry. These dynamics disproportionately affect actors closest to affected communities. At the same time, these actors often having fewer institutional resources and less capacity to respond strategically. This creates a critical asymmetry. Thus, most essential for locally grounded responses are also the most exposed and least supported. So we have a broader implication. Harmful information environments contribute to gradual erosion of civic trust. And civic trust, as you know, is essential for community acceptance, access, safe operation of civil society actors. In this sense, the digital information environment is now part of the broader risk landscape affecting civic space and principled action.
Thank you so much for highlighting so many different examples and way in which this trend is just becoming quite alarming. I think we're going to change the beat a bit and try to be a bit more hopeful and look at how we can address these challenges. And so, Jean-Francois, how is your organization adapting to these challenges, and what would you recommend that others do to try and combat this horrible trend of the criminalization of impartial aid and also the spread of harmful information?
Yes, thank you for the question. In Médecins du Monde, we try to adapt the way we work, of course, in this environment. And our responsibility is to follow with 2 aspects. Of course, first of all, is to protect our team. This is the thing which is very important. Protect our team, and in the same way, try to ensure that people in need continue to receive, of course, care, while making sure that we are still able to denounce violation of right. And first, we invest in legal and contextual analysis. But we now need to pair in with systematic monitoring of harmful information. In several contexts, including the occupied Palestinian territory, harmful narrative have portrayed humanitarian organizations as partisan or as a threat to national security. When, from my side, I talk about this context in French media, some people say that I'm working for the Hamas, and this is very complicated to explain that we work for humanitarian right. This narrative often precede or accompany restrictive measures such as the registration, designation of administrative sanction. You know that we are waiting for a result regarding the risk we have to be expelled from Israel and Gaza and West Bank today with something like 60 NGO. We clearly see that with the Israeli authority, it's more and more difficult. Second, we strengthen training and preparedness. Our teams receive guidance on navigating checkpoint, of course, interacting with authority, documenting incident, and understanding international humanitarian law and the humanitarian principle. We reinforce internal compliance procedure to ensure that our operation respect domestic law while always keeping humanitarian principle and medical ethics as our compass. Third, we continue to prioritize dialogue and transparency, as we already do, of course. We engage with national authority, de facto authority, and local administration to explain our mandate and the legal basis for impartial humanitarian action, as we already do. We rely on the language of UNSCR 2730, which condemn the criminalization and arbitrary detention of humanitarian personnel, and on the commitment made in the Declaration of the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel. In environment where rumor or misinformation circulate, for example, claims that humanitarian organizations support one party to the conflict, or that medical aid is being diverted like it's often the case in DRC, we engage directly with community leaders, local media, and civilian society actors to explain our mandate and our principle. Fourth, we rely on collective action. Through the OPS Consortium and NGO coordination platform, we share information, identify patterns, develop tools to push back against harmful narratives. But adaptation is not enough. We need systemic change, and this requires action from all stakeholders. To state, of course, we urge release all illegally detained humanitarian workers, implement humanitarian exemption in domestic law, and ensure that counterterrorism and sanction measures do not criminalize impartial humanitarian activity. But also, publicly counter harmful narrative that delegitimate humanitarian action, instead of supporting them, as we saw recently in France from ministers themselves. Just remind that in France, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, he attacked Mrs. Albanese by using misinformation, which is completely incredible. The Ministry also of Europe, Mr. Haddad, asked for a survey to see if the money we use in Palestine was not used by Hamas. You know, it contributes to create delegitimation. Is really strictly close to the speech of Israeli authority, and this is not acceptable for us. We also, of course, need a state to do more in terms of accountability for perpetrator of attack, and we have to fight against impunity, and this is something which is very important to remind that impunity is not good for our work. To the donor, we say avoid compliance requirement to contradict impartiality or expose NGO to legal risk, but also support early warning system and narrative monitoring, because harmful information can escalate into legal restriction, arrest, or violence. To multilateral institutions, we ask, help us monitor the impact of criminalization on humanitarian access. monitor not only attack on humanitarian personnel, but also information attack. And finally, to the public, we need you to understand that criminalization of humanitarian action does not make the world safer. Without taking political party side, I think we should and we must denounce and oppose anti-right political actors who want to destroy international solidarity. Protecting NGO is protecting our democracy, and we are in the middle of a battle. It's a cultural battle to defend our value, our right, and we have to be more political, I think, even as an NGO. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I think it was really great that you sort of concretely highlighted all the different actors and how everyone should be more accountable. Similar, I would like to bring you, Christina, into the conversation and how, you know, we've heard quite a few examples and Jean-Francois' opinion on this, but how do you think the sector should be responding to this, and also specifically looking at like what donors and states can do, if you can hone in on a little bit more on those aspects?
Thank you. Yes, I think Jean-Francois outlined it in a way perfectly of how complex the tasks for many different actors are. But I want to add a few more specific examples that I think highlight the homework perhaps for all of us. I was at another panel where it was framed as the issue being everyone's problem, but no one's job. And I think this is one of the things we are facing because it is a cross-cutting issue. It is one that affects security risk management, it is one that affects communication, it is one that affects operations. And that is quite challenging to find the right ways of working internally in an appropriate manner. So to give you some very concrete examples, in one agricultural support project, the harmful information, the disinformation that was spread was that these tractors that were donated actually had trackers in there and it was an espionage tool. So if you don't know this about your project and then you think the logo simply means you are supporting something, whereas for those who've read this disinformation, they have very different association when they see these images. And that's where it becomes a very practical issue to think about for acceptance risk assessment. But then there's also the issue, what do you do if you had a serious incident? And this is also very often a moment where there is a serious risk of disinformation occurring or harmful misinformation. So a very concrete example again, a health facility is overrun, a ultrasound machine is stolen by a rebel group, they take a picture of it, put it online and spread it. Now the logo of the organization is right on there, but it is on a post from that rebel organization. How is it interpreted, including in European media? The organization is supplying terrorists. So if you don't know this information is out there, if you don't have a good ability to counter this narrative, it simply sticks. And that's when it becomes very dangerous. And then also, I think as we've already heard, the doxing of staff, the directly threatening of individuals using their personal profiles is also a very serious risk factor. So these are just some of these sort of very, very concrete tasks, which in my view underline just how much more there needs to be collaboration within organizations between doing assessments and communicating on these things and knowing how to communicate. So for the communication part, I think there's some really important lessons we all need to kind of integrate into how we think about it, because now communication is borderless. In the past, there could be communication for the donor in a humanitarian diplomacy for the donor countries who might donate for certain things and the affected communities. Today, one repost and your framing that is meant to collect money for a good cause is seen in an affected community that may interpret the way an image or phrasing is used in a very different way, and that can quickly turn into harmful information as well. So I think there are a lot of challenges. And the final challenge I want to mention is also one that we need to think more collectively between organizations, because this is not about protecting the logo of one organization, the reputation of one particular activity. This is, I think, as Jean-François put it very well and really underlining this, this is about protecting the concepts of aid, the humanitarian space, the values, the principles that unite us. And if we can't come together to defend this, then we'll have a serious problem for the sector, because the undermining is happening everywhere, not just where there's operations and where we need the security risk management, but I think, as Jean-François said, also in the support from governments in Europe or elsewhere. And that's where my sort of final point is, I think, where we really need to look is how can we collectively come together to understand these narratives, to build a counter-narrative that puts out there the values that has probably driven all of you to come into this work in the first place. How can we make sure that gets communicated and that we preserve what we all believe in, and that I think is so important for continuing our work. So I think more collective action. And as a very final point, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I do think social media gives us a lot of opportunities. I like to think of it as a revolution as profound as the invention of the printing press that has changed the world profoundly, with suddenly everyone having access to printed materials. I think we are at an opportunity where we can really increase communication between people across the globe around key communities, but we need to get it right, and we need to adapt to raise to the challenges that it becomes an opportunity rather than a threat.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intervention. And when you were sort of thinking about local strategies, I want to bring Fernanda into this conversation, because you work a lot on the ground, on the local level. So I would really, of course, lots of different groups are doing things, but I think also it's important to acknowledge the power and that local groups are not passive, and that they are also leading the struggle to combat disinformation and harmful information. So I would really like to bring you into this conversation, and to just what can different stakeholders do to help support locally led strategies, and what are promising trends that you've noticed to go against this harmful narrative that's been developing.
Thank you. Well, I think from our experience, the first thing is recognize that harmful narratives are not isolated incidents, but part of these broader governance challenges. And when we talk about countries in Latin America, for example, it's not possible to wait for only regulation of platforms, for example, or regulation of AI. We don't have this power that other regions has, as in the case of Europe, for example. So the first thing that we are working is to strengthen locally rooted capacities. Local organizations already understand how narratives evolve in their contexts, but they often lack sustained resources and tools for monitoring and analysis. So they need support to narrative monitoring, coalition building, and anticipatory strategies. So we're trying to shift responses from reactive to preventive. At the same time, I think it's very important to integrating digital risks into protection frameworks, because existing protection mechanisms still focus mainly on physical security and obviously it's important, but to not fully address online harassment, disinformation, reputational attacks. So integrating digital risk analysis, it's like leads to more realistic and context-appropriated protection strategies, and supports key democratic conditions like freedom of expression, access to information, and protection from stigmatization. At the same time, we need, and I think we listened a lot of it yesterday, but we need to adapting funding structures. As you know, this mismatch, there is a key mismatch because we have long-term evolution of harmful narratives versus short-term funding cycles. So we need flexible and long-term funding to support for ecosystem approaches, including collaboration between civil society, digital rights actors, locally rooted organizations, and I think it's very important to work in collaboration, as Christina said, among different regions. Because what we are realizing, it is different regions are facing the same challenges, but we are not connected to compare and to think together about solutions. And I mean, strengthening information integrity should be understood as part of strengthening the enabling environments for rights-based work. Because when civil society is systematically delegitimized, participation, trust, and cooperation are weakened. Addressing harmful narratives requires not only technical solutions, not only regulation solutions, but sustained commitment to protecting civic space and valuing locally grounded knowledge. Today, protected principled action also means protecting the information environmentals where legitimate trust and cooperation are constructed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we haven't forgot about you online, Katrin. So, I mean, what was perfect is Fernanda was speaking a lot about what donors can do. So perhaps it's great for you to bring in the donor perspective. What do you see as the way forward? I mean, we've heard that what people really want is long-term commitments and also bringing in the local knowledge. Yeah, what are you seeing as the key challenges and the way forward?
Thanks a lot. And adding a bit to what has already been said, I think when we look at, for instance, disinformation and misinformation challenges that are on the rise and leading to increased security threats and access constraints, I think one of the key challenges is that this online development and spread of information is so fast, and humanitarian organizations are constantly running behind the wheel in terms of how to respond to this rapid development. And additionally, with these threats rising online, it also creates an uncertainty and an anonymization as to where the threat is coming from, which establishes an even more challenging work environment for aid workers, which is complex in itself. And I think, as also both Christina and Fernanda were mentioning, collaboration and collective efforts are key in the way forward. No organization can challenge or can face these challenges alone. I also see there's a need for innovative solutions to any of these challenges that aid workers are facing, but also solutions that are challenging the current status quo. And I would think, as exemplifies the HOPES project that we're currently funding, is also a project that are run by several organizations. So it also supports this collective response. I also see the need to look into both response, preparedness and prevention aspects, addressing these challenges, as well as good practices in terms of how to turn these negative, harmful narratives around. But again, it's a collective effort. From a donor perspective, of course, this goes to that community as well. I think with the changing donor base and limited resources available in general, there's need for strengthened coordination and collaboration at that level or at this level. We've already seen strengthened efforts, especially throughout the last year, which has led to enhanced collaboration and also transparency in priorities, and also to try and avoid duplicating efforts. And these efforts need to be continued. I think from DG ECHO's side, as a donor, enhancing the protection of humanitarian personnel will remain a key priority, and we will continue to support prevention measures, operational support, and also care for victims. And in this regard, like compliance and respect for IHL and humanitarian principles continue to be key. And we will also continue to push for advocacy for IHL and reinforce the application of humanitarian principles via our work on the resolution, but also by promoting a common understanding of these principles and how these need to be translated into actions on the ground. So to summarize all of this, DG ECHO will continue to support and advocate for the protection of humanitarian personnel, and we also stand ready to back up our humanitarian partners facing these new and very fast developing challenges. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. And I'm very delighted with the panelists who have given us a lot of time for Q&A. So I would like to start with the audience. Okay, we have a hand here. The first hand that I saw was right in front, and then there was. We'll take two questions, and if you would like a particular panelist to answer the question, then you can direct it to them. If it's a more general question, then I will pick someone first. But yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Andrea. I work for Médecins du Monde. Thank you so much for this discussion. I had two questions. One is for Christina. You mentioned that countering harmful information and disinformation requires coordination between communication, security, operations, and that it's very vital to work on local acceptance and also analyzing risks from the acceptance perspective. But I was wondering if you would have any more recommendations on how to communicate better, because you did mention that it's important that humanitarian organizations, the humanitarian sector in general, steps up in communicating, but it also requires resources. I think this has already been mentioned, funding. But what other concrete examples maybe you've seen in your research? Do we need to think in terms of communication, crisis communication management, or new areas that maybe we weren't necessarily investing on, and that would indeed require more resources, but if we would have to be idealists? And I had the second question for Catherine. I was wondering, you already mentioned how ECHO is supporting the work on disinformation from an advocacy, policy, and funding perspective. I was wondering if you could maybe develop a bit more on the upcoming humanitarian communication and whether it will include other concrete actions in this regard. Thank you so much.
Great. I think since those were two questions, we'll start with those. Christina, if you can start looking at your recommendations and how we can communicate better.
No, thank you for this really important question. I think as a short answer, I would say Fernanda has already said it all. The key things that we're seeing in our research, she already underlined, and I think these are two particular things. local organizations know how to communicate. And this is something we're seeing in the Sahel and in Syria and many other places. It is rare for local organizations to get the same kind of harmful narratives attached to themselves as international organizations. So what I would say, the recommendation from that is, it's a great opportunity for a very constructive localization process, for INGOs to work with their local partners and let them lead to some extent on the communication and certainly involve them in how to frame things. They know it and they can advise. And I think the other point around this is where I think also Fernanda already said the key thing. It's about distinguishing in the response between reactive, so the examples I gave are all how to react to something that has happened, but really where we need to get to is the preventive, that we can already put out there the clear description in a language that's appropriated for social media platforms of what the humanitarian principles are, what the objectives of aid are, that this just becomes an immunization, if you want, for social media users, that when they see stupid things being suggested, there is no, the risk that they believe it is much, much lower, so they will just swipe it away and it won't have the same impact. And then I think the last point in terms of what is really needed is also a better collaboration with local media, because very often we find that the local journalists have a very poor understanding of what the humanitarian principles are. There's distrust between aid agencies and local journalists, and as a result, there are also no amplifiers of what the humanitarian intention really is. And that could be another really good way of working towards, by just having advocates, not in a PR sense, but in a sense that they just understand and can better explain, to make populations more resistant to misleading information.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And I mean, yeah, Katrin, if you can also just maybe also respond to what we've just heard from Christina, but also bring up more concretely what is ECHO doing and what can you continue to do?
Yes, thanks a lot for the question. As I previously mentioned, from our side, our work in terms both of policy work, advocacy and funding, it all needs to go hand in hand. And the same goes for our upcoming humanitarian communication, which hopefully will be launched before summer. And there's a big step in terms of enhancing the protection of humanitarian personnel, in contrast to our last communication from 2021. Of course, at this stage, I cannot go in more detail of that, but as I mentioned, it continues to be a priority, and these aspects will also be addressed within our upcoming communication. So thank you.
Great, thank you for that. We'll now go to another question. There were quite a few hands.
Hello, my name is Iris. I'm a student right now, but previously I was working on the US-Mexico border for an NGO, working with newly arriving asylum seekers. And I was on kind of the receiving end of one of these campaigns with my face associated with it on Twitter. It had like over 2 million views. Elon Musk commented, and it was like a kind of a scary situation, I think personally, although they didn't identify me with my full name. And it kind of was the narrative of, trafficking of asylum seekers, and, went against what our organization was actually doing. And I guess just from that perspective of having felt the fear associated with having my face in this viral post, I wonder if you have any concrete examples from your organizations of, like, when you're talking about protection of staff, what does that actually look like, or what kind of support are you able to provide to staff who are inevitably going to end up in these situations?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for also opening up and being vulnerable. And I mean, I think we should also acknowledge that you shared something very personal, which, yeah, I mean, a smear campaign against you is incredibly scary. And yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I think, Fernanda, if I can start with you with that question, and then I'll go to you, Jean-Francois, because I think both of you work directly with aid workers and personnel.
Sure. First, thank you for sharing with us. I think I have some examples that situations happened in the last years. One of them is an organization in Brazil. They started to work to communicate locally, not using social media, but they put like totems in different restaurants, bars, in the periphery of Brazil, in some cities, and they communicate by these totems. And it is interesting because the groups, the communities are very involved in trying to understand what is happening in the city, in the neighborhood, but not using social media. So it is one example as how some people are trying to communicate in different ways. We have there too a fund to support local journalists. And I think it's very important because this context of disinformation, when they arrive in our organization, we have more capacity to support our team, to try and understand what we need to do different in the next time. For example, when we start some campaign, some research in Fundação Multitudes, we close our social media, not the organization's social media, but the persons that work there, and we try to put our families outside of this focus without pictures of the children of our family, for example. So we are trying to protect in a preventive way, that the thing that I was mentioned, but we also work with capacitation of candidates, women candidates, or indigenous groups to try and understand this information structure, because as I mentioned and Christine said, they know locally what is happening. We had a research with indigenous in Chile, for example, another research, not that I mentioned, and they know exactly how the disinformation campaign started, who was responsible for doing that. So our role in this process was trying to capacitate how to do with it, how to do with this knowledge that they have. So I think this is a mix of new ways to communicate, to prevent our social media and not normalize that all our data is available, but at the same time, we know that it's not an individual issue, so it's not fault of the team or your fault. So we try to work in advocacy also with platforms, to try and create more supportive ways to report and to change the policy that this platform have.
Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, Jean-Francois, if you can also add to that.
Yeah, regarding the way we try to support our national team, if it's a question, I mean, we are really concerned about the security of our team, international and local team and national staff, of course. And we have a human resources policy to support them, and we can adapt this policy regarding the context which can be different, you know. And we have we call it a duty of care policy. And for sure, regarding the economical context, security context, and we adapt the way we help our national staff in terms of economical support, in terms of security issue, or things like this. Just imagine that last few years we have to face very specific context we never have to face it before. For example, at the time where the American army left Afghanistan, in emergency, there were a lot of national staff. They were under pressure. They were really afraid about coming back of Taliban, and they were really afraid about for their life. And we have at this time requests from national staff, even older national staff, to help them to leave Afghanistan because of security issue. And it was huge challenge for NGO to help them to leave the country. Most of the time it was not possible, but it was a kind of new request coming from the national staff. The other exceptional example is for sure with Gaza staff, Palestinian staff. For example, Médecins du Monde France, we have something like 120 Palestinian staff working with us in Gaza, and also something like 100 in West Bank. But since 3 years, because of the blockade, and it's difficult for Palestinian people to leave Gaza. But just I want to let you know that during these three years, we, as an organization, if we get the request, we could be able to pay even smuggler to help our staff to left, even if it was something like $5,000, maybe $10,000. We were ready, if request arrived, to pay for that, and it was not happen. But we were ready to pay for people, even for smuggler, to help people to leave the genocide context. Of course, it's not something we will do everywhere, because it's not the same context everywhere. And but according to specific context, we are able to increase the level of duty of care response if it's needed, because the security of our staff is something which is the most important for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Could I add something quick? Could I add something quick?
Yeah, you can also add something.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. So I'm really sorry what you had to go through. And just to add to what we've heard, I think well-run big organizations these days try what they can to provide the duty of care for their staff. Where I personally see a big gap is in particular for volunteers or young people going abroad for the first time. They get very little guidance of how to protect their personal information before going and how to deal in such a situation. So I think that's something for the wider aid sector in a way, because people can be extremely vulnerable and there needs all the support that isn't available for everyone, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I also, to bring a perspective, when I worked at Greenpeace International on the strategic defense team, we also had a similar guideline for duty of care. And I think what's really two key factors is informed consent for those who are on the ground, because often we'll ask people to do things and, we know the patterns, and if you've worked in the space for a while, you know the kind of things that could happen. But if it's as you said, like if it's your first time as an activist, you might not be aware of what exactly is being asked of you, and you don't see the risk. And I think the other thing to think about is when we share things, what are actually the consequences for the activists on the ground? Because sometimes you'll see an NGO might share a picture of a protest, and just by sharing that picture on social media, that could result in someone actually being killed on the ground, because then a big oil company, or in this case, a violent government or rebel group will see this and be like, those are the troublemakers. So I think it's also really just so crucial that we also acknowledge and think critically about what we are sharing on our platforms, even things that you think might be quite innocent can have real life consequences if someone's personal data, if you can see and identify someone's face. I don't know, Katrin, if you want to answer this question too, or whether we should go to the audience. Do you have something you want to say?
I think the only aspect to also add from our end is also that enhancing support for local workers is also continue to be key from our side, also in the upcoming communication, because they're the people most at risk these days, as the data shows. So we should definitely keep this in mind in the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, okay, there's a hand. I don't know who was first between the two of you. But yeah, okay. Please, yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for the much valuable insights. My name is Hiram. I'm with Diakoni. I work on protection, and I have one question to Katrin, and the other one could be for a general one, and it's connected to...
Can we stick to one question?
It's one that is linked, that can be split into. Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's connected partly to what our colleague highlighted, and on the risk of disinformation, misinformation, and harmful, information dissemination, especially in situations of armed conflict, which is becoming quite, it's increasing over time. And over time, as organizations, we've much more been resorting to, social media as a tool of engagement to manage these risks. But on the last 2-3 years, the other side, those who are perpetuating this have also advanced their game. They have moved now into utilizing AI agents, bots, and on the social media platform, these bots are deployed to spread this information, consistently engage. They are not human, so the capability to even manage that becomes quite limited. And on the other side, the possibility or the capability on our side as humanitarian to deploy such technology, we most of the time catch up with tech. We are not at the front line. And it's connected to funding, for example, because that requires resources. So that's where my question to Katrin lies, on whether DG ECO is considering to have such instruments or resources that could support humanitarian organizations as a protection response or protection risk mitigation strategy to either develop or acquire. Acquiring is part of the problem because it's possibly acquiring from those who had, is contributing to the same, but developing and getting to that space as organizations, which may be seen not to be humanitarian per se, but the result is contributing significantly to a humanitarian objective. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Katrin, if you could answer that.
Yes, and thanks a lot for the question. And you're really touching upon, I think, a key challenge in general is transparency on both sides. I think from ECHO's side, we need to look into best practices, tools, and solutions. And that needs to come from the NGOs and UN side that are sending in proposals for us to review, let's say. And that's why a conversation as today is so key, because these are some of the messages that we need to hear as well. Because as I said earlier, the solution, and it's a collective responsibility in terms of taking the way forward. So of course we are open to any practical solutions that you see can work on the ground in terms of enhancing the protection of aid workers. We just need to receive those messages as well on our end. So thank you.
Great, thank you for the answer. If we can go to the question, the hand in the middle there, and then the hand over there.
Hi, I'm Shirin. I work for Freedom from Torture in the UK. I see challenges with regards to advising staff on how to respond if they do come under attack. I also see issues with staff like not wanting to engage with online campaigns, I think because of that fear of that they might be attacked. So I'm just wondering, like, on a really simple on-the-ground level, how best to advise them. Like, should we be advising them to respond back to these attacks? It's really natural to, like, defend yourself, defend your reputation, or should we be suggesting no response, and to allow the organization, perhaps almost a kind of digital security guard, to be employed within the organization to protect those staff and to respond on their behalf? Do you have any advice on that, like, kind of really on the ground level, to more like staff beneath me kind of thing?
Great. I think I'll ask Jean-Francois to provide an answer on what you practically, since you have this whole duty of care.
Thank you for the question. You know, something which is important is to let understand to our staff that there is no individual position. When you take a position, it will have an impact for all the organization and for everybody. So it's important, according to the context where we work, to adapt our communication strategy, and most of the time to prevent a security incident. I mean, to discuss about the level where the communication should start, you know, and to protect the staff. So. Most of the time we try to, we are in the balance, you know, we want to give to the team the capacity for communication, because we don't want to centralize all the way we work, but in the same time we are obliged to impose some policy, because there is a security issue, but also there is a reputation issue for the organization. So, but maybe let me just say something, other thing where I want to go also. It's very important to discuss about tools, about technical approach, and that's what we try to do together to find some solution for a concrete aspect on the field. But as we say before, and for me it's very important to say that in the other aspect of technical approach, we have to talk about political issue, which is something very important. We are facing an historical time for me today regarding the humanitarian ecosystem, which is attacked by not only authoritarianism and totalitarianism system. We don't have to wait anything from North Korea or Russia to defend the international right. And but what we face today is that even in our democracy, this value, this solidarity is attacked by some political actors who assume the fact that as a populist from right extreme, they want to kill us. They assume that. And they really want to say, we cut US aid, we divide by 2 the public aid development fund, you know, even in Europe, because it's not just something like that. It's not because there is no money, it's because there is a real political point of view, assume that they want to destroy solidarity, and it's linked with ideological approach. And those populists, they assume the fact that NGO, independent NGO, they are not the kind of soft power tools to defend, you know, value as equality and also international humanitarian right. And they assume, even in our democracy, the fact that they want to destroy all the system which has been created after the Second War, just not to repeat what was the horror of the Shoah and also the Second War time. And at this time, we can observe the fact that International Justice Court is not supported even by some Occidental government. International Penal Court is not supported even by Occidental government, even by democracy system. So there is really a strong political attack against solidarity. And I think Of course, I'm president of an NGO, independent NGO, and we don't want to be on the right or on the left ideological approach. We don't want to be a political party, but we are obliged, I think, to say that we want to fight political people who want to kill us. We cannot say we want to be impartial because we are impartial and we want to keep neutrality when you have in front of you people who say that they want to kill you. It's not possible. So, of course, we will continue with OPS program and with other actors to document the reality of what's going on regarding the criminalization, the way that there are some misinformation which want to destroy us, but I assume the fact that we are in the cultural battle, and if we want to defend the way we support our value of solidarity, we have to assume the fact that we are against political actors, and for me, they are targeted, and I want to fight against them to defend democracy, solidarity, and defend the way we think the solidarity.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's also a really important point, that we often are way too focused on so-called trying to be neutral, and you shouldn't be neutral when faced with massive human rights violations, with genocides. It's just not the time to be neutral. And I think something that we haven't yet really brought into this conversation enough is also corporate accountability. And with disinformation, there's also social media platforms, and big tech are also really involved in this. And we are often prioritizing profits of companies over defending and focusing on human rights. We have time for 2 more questions. There was a hand there.
Can I compliment one thing?
We have time for 1 more question then.
It's quickly. I think one thing that I understood in the last years working with disinformation, hate speech, it is very important to consider the different architecture of these social medias. So, for example, in the case of Instagram, I also advise the people that we work together to try use the tools that the platform offers. In the case of try filter some words to protect the comments, to try don't open space for these bots and what you were mentioned. And at the same time, this it's like a little not exactly new, but don't feed the troll is always important. So this attempt to answer the attacks as an individual thing, it's not good. And in the last month, we were working in a project in 10 countries in Latin America about disinformation against women candidates. And the organization in Argentina, responsible for the research there, they started to be attacked. And the research was described for different people on social media as supporting ideologically this kind of thing, and comparing with the organization from Chile working with the same research, it was interesting because this organization in Chile, they have all structure to prevent this kind of attacks using, for example, this architecture of different social media. And it wasn't true in the case of the Argentina partner. So this kind of capacitation is still very important. So sometimes we need these practical things to use in favor of our work too.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have time for 1 more question, which is going to be there. And I encourage those who still have questions to come and speak to the speakers at the end. But I also know that everyone will probably be wanting to get lunch.
I'll try and be quick.
No pressure.
Hi, my name is Jordi. I'm a student, and I also recently worked with the German Red Cross in the Security and Crisis Management Unit, so I've been all in this world a little bit. I wanted to speak. I wanted to firstly say thank you for acknowledging the volunteer gap. I think the duty of care discussion, it's been a really big growth in the security management space, and it's there's a lot of unfortunate scenarios where employees who, like drivers, for example, who have worked with humanitarian teams for years aren't considered in the same or don't receive the same sort of security protections as long-term policy officers, for example. So thank you for raising that. I wanted to ask what maybe solidarity can look like for international organizations with local organizations who are facing the security threats as well, because I think there's a lot of complexity and nuance. There was discussions there about how we need to work together to present a humanitarian narrative and support one another. But then there's obviously contexts as well where the international brand can be a negative impact on that local community. I've been focusing on Sudan in my research, and international organizations, there's a level of mistrust within both warring parties there. And so in the context of local humanitarian workers bearing the highest risks and unfortunately facing the most amount of security and safety incidents, how can international organizations raise that, acknowledge that, speak to that regularly, and provide protections if possible, when also, contributing to that risk as well?
Thank you for that. I mean, I'll start with you, Christina, and if we can, I'll then also give the question to everyone, and if you can also provide your closing message. And I mean, we have 2 minutes, so if everyone can answer that question pretty concretely and shortly.
Thank you for this really valid question. I try to be really short, but I think what you've raised is the key issue, that everything is so context specific. And that means in this field, we can't have a protocol that says do A, B, C, D and you be all right. It's all about understanding the context and understanding the context by the hour during some crisis. And that means we have to have the right teams in place to deal with it and find exactly the right way how things can be communicated in an appropriate manner. And then I think I'd sort of put that as the sort of the closing remark. In a way, this is a long-term issue of capacity building within the aid sector and developing the right skills. It's not something we can have as a quick add-on. We can't have it through staff flown in who quickly does some communication or anything. It is something that needs to become an in-aid process that very much works with the local partners and learns to listen from them in many ways. So thank you.
Thank you. If we can go to you, Katrin, can you also provide your closing remark and also address that briefly?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. And I think also that it raises the challenge that we need to have procedures in place, but all of these also need to be flexible and person-centered to the specific context that we are addressing in terms of facing these different challenges. And it goes back to the same in terms of ensuring like a more collective responsibility and to learn from one another on how to tackle these issues. So even if we need specific solutions for a certain context, we can also learn to see what works in one place could maybe also be transferred to somewhere else. But again, it goes back to also maintaining a flexibility in all of this. So thank you.
Thank you. Fernanda?
Actually, I want to thank you for this opportunity to have this dialogue with a field that I really admire. And I think we need to move forward, trying to have more and more collaboration, to put hand-to-hand advocacy, policy, research, because without data, it's not possible to understand completely what is happening in these different regions. So I'm here if you want to talk and to think together about new ways to try to fix this problem that is for all generations. So thank you.
Thank you. Jean-Francois?
Yeah, I don't think I have to add something. I was agree with what was said. Just we have to adapt the way we talk and the way we make advocacy regarding to the political context, and in close discussion with our colleague on the field, you know. And most of the time, regarding advocacy, we should be on low profile because we want to keep the security of the team. But it's really through a discussion with the local organization we work with to decide what can be the good way to support the advocacy. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for also this round table. Sorry for my English speaking, but I tried to do my best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. And it's been a really fantastic conversation. And I really liked the diversity, the different roles that you all have within your organizations and your different organizations. I think it was really beneficial to get different perspectives. And I'm really delighted with our speakers for speaking very shortly so that we could get a lot more engagement from everyone in the audience, and thank you to all of you for asking lots of questions. I appreciate it a lot, and yeah, there are going to be a lot more interesting sessions. This is not the final session, so please attend some of the other sessions.